Have you ever seen a whole motorcycle gang brought to its knees by one phone call? That's exactly what happens here. When the leader of the ruthless Steel Fists mocks an overweight veteran in Rosie's diner, nobody expects the tables to turn so dramatically. Yet, with a single call to his former recon buddies, the tide shifts, revealing that true strength comes not just from muscles and brawn, but from loyalty and purpose. It's an explosive confrontation that shakes the entire town of Greystone Valley and reminds us that brotherhood forged in combat doesn't fade with time. Curious to know how a once intimidated community stands up to terror and how old war friendships dismantle a gang's power structure? Stay tuned for the full story. Every detail, every emotional twist will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales and to support our growing community of story lovers. Marcus Bull Townsend had always been hard to miss in a crowd, though in recent years it was for reasons that made him grimace rather than grin. Gone was the streamlined physique he'd once proudly displayed as a recon Marine. Now he carried extra weight on his torso and a sluggishness in his gait that reminded him daily of how far he'd drifted from his prime. Still, on that brisk autumn morning, he felt a flicker of the old soldier's spark as he stepped into Rosie's diner in the heart of Greystone Valley. The place smelled of sizzling bacon, fresh coffee, and a faint cinnamon aroma Rosie always said was her secret weapon to keep customers lingering. Marcus settled himself at a booth near the wide front windows, trying not to notice the slight creak of the vinyl cushion beneath him. He gazed out at the town's main street, which was only just beginning to stir with the morning's routine. A handful of vehicles ambled by, and townspeople in warm coats made their way to the grocery store or post office, offering one another quick hellos. It felt comfortable, safe, even if a shadow had loomed over Greystone Valley for some time now, thanks to the notorious motorcycle gang that called itself the Steel Fists. His moment of peace was short-lived. The door to Rosie's diner swung open with a sharp chime, ushering in a cold gust of wind and the swaggering presence of Blade, the Steel Fists' leader. Blade was tall and rangy, a sneer stamped permanently on his face. He was followed by several of his gang members, their leather vests bearing a snarling silver skull circled by spiked flames. Their boots clomped loudly against the linoleum floor, and the once cozy diner seemed to shrink in their presence. The chatter around the counter quieted. A few patrons discreetly turned away, not wanting to catch the biker's attention. Blade's gaze roamed the diner until it fell on Marcus. Immediately, an unsettling gleam lit up the gang leader's eyes. "Well, well," Blade drawled, toothpick rolling between his lips. "What do we have here? Another washout from the Corps?" His mocking tone held the intention of causing pain. Laughter rippled through the other bikers, a low, menacing rumble. Marcus felt the heat creep up his neck, an anger kindling inside that he hadn't felt in a long time. He clenched his jaw, recalling the days when an insult from a stranger wouldn't have made him blink. But something about this gang, its stranglehold on the town, the fear they generated, stoked a deeper fury in him. He glanced at the other diners, most of whom avoided eye contact. They had seen what the Steel Fists were capable of, shaking down shop owners for protection money, vandalizing property, and meting out violence with a ruthless efficiency. The townsfolk had every reason to be intimidated, but Marcus, overweight and out of practice though he might be, was not used to swallowing his pride in the face of bullies. His heart thumped as he sat there, eyes locked with Blade's. Marcus might have lost his fighting edge, but one truth burned in him with unwavering clarity. Real strength didn't manifest as strutting or picking on weaker folks. The memory of what genuine camaraderie and bravery felt like made the Steel Fists' bravado appear pitiful in comparison. He thought back to his old recon unit, to men who had rescued each other under blistering enemy fire without a second thought. A bond formed in life-or-death moments which almost could never be replaced by intimidation or cheap threats. Yet, Blade, oblivious to such nuances, seemed to revel in the simmering tension. He leaned closer, eyes dancing with malice. "What's wrong, Big Marine?" he goaded, emphasizing the word big with a smirk. "Did you come here to reclaim your glory days in the bottom of a donut box?" Another round of mocking laughter swept through the bikers, each one eager to prove their loyalty by ridiculing the stranger. Marcus felt his fists tighten under the table. He was tempted, so very tempted, to rise to his feet and show them that he might be heavier now, but he was far from defenseless. Still, he knew all too well that responding to provocation with immediate violence would play right into Blade's hands. Scenes of chaos and broken furniture would only deepen the town's fear and give the Steel Fist more reason to retaliate. Besides, the proud soldier in him believed he wasn't outnumbered if he called on the right backup. Memories flitted through his mind, back when a single radio call to base meant the difference between rescue and ruin. Collecting himself, he dipped into his jacket pocket and fished out a small, battered cell phone. He pressed a well-worn speed dial contact, the one he'd never removed even after all these years. The dial tone pulsed, once, twice. Then a voice, edged with the crispness of someone who never quite left the service, answered. "Marcus? Been a while. Everything okay?" Marcus took a slow breath, refusing to let his eyes flick away from Blade's sneer. "Lewis, I'm in a tight spot," he said, voice low but calm. "Remember our old code?" The line went silent for a long moment, filled only by the faint crackle of the connection. Then came Lewis Lou Bradley's measured reply. "I remember. Where do you need us?" It was no casual question. It was the language of men who once fought side by side, men who had no qualms traveling across the country if one of their own needed help. As the phone call ended, Marcus laid the device on the table, the screen still glowing softly. Blade and his men snickered, assuming Marcus had tried calling the police, useless in a place where the local sheriff was too intimidated to act. But Marcus knew differently. The wheels were set in motion. The sense of relief that coursed through him was palpable, a reminder that no matter how isolated one might feel, real brotherhood had no geographical limit. Sunlight spilled through the diner windows as mid-morning settled in, casting a golden warmth over the checkered floor and chrome-trimmed tables. Rosie, the diner's owner, made her rounds with a coffee pot in hand, refilling cups even though her normally welcoming smile was pinched with worry. Outside, the Steel Fists loitered, their motorcycles parked in an intimidating row along the curb. Their collective presence seeped into the diner, a tension that prickled at the nerves of every patron inside. Rosie paused at Marcus's booth, her hand trembling slightly as she poured fresh coffee into his cup. "They're not letting up," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder at the group of bikers visible through the large glass panes. "I can feel it." Marcus nodded in silent agreement, his mind replaying the phone call to Lou Bradley. He could almost imagine the old recon unit springing into action, dusty gear being pulled out of storage, connections lighting up in a web of camaraderie that transcended states and years. A few tables away, Naomi Graves, the local school teacher, tried to continue her tutoring session with two of her students. But the children kept nervously looking outside. Their once spirited chatter about reading assignments had dwindled to uneasy murmurs. Naomi exuded a calm demeanor, but her eyes belied her concern. Marcus had noticed how protective she was of the kids, always placing herself between them and any perceived threat. The air was thick with apprehension when Blade sauntered back into the diner, his footsteps echoing loudly on the linoleum. He swung a leg over one of the counter stools, demanding a cup of coffee with a voice that dripped disdain. Rosie obliged, setting a cup in front of him, her hands shaking. He flicked a scornful glance at Marcus. "Made your phone call, old man?" he asked, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness. "Hope you didn't waste your minutes. This is our town now." Marcus inhaled slowly, reminding himself to remain calm. He hadn't fully explained his call to anyone in the diner yet, but at some point the truth would emerge. For now, he mustered a level tone. "Funny thing about towns," he said. "They only belong to those who earn them." Blade's smirk turned into a full-blown sneer. In that brief exchange, the tension ratcheted up another notch. Marcus could see the worry etched into Rosie's face, hear the hush that fell over Naomi's table. Minutes later, one of the bikers outside revved his motorcycle, the thunderous noise rattling the diner's windows. Marcus gazed out to see a steady trickle of more bikers joining the Steel Fists, leather vests gleaming in the sun. The gang was growing in number, emboldened by Blade's swagger. The entire town seemed to watch from behind closed doors or half-drawn blinds, uncertain whether to hope or despair. Yet, a kernel of resolve took root in Marcus's chest. He might not be the warrior he once was, but he was not alone. Somewhere out there, Lou Bradley and others from their old recon family were mobilizing. They were coming, and the Steel Fists had no idea what was about to roll into Greystone Valley. The roar of motorcycles reverberated through Greystone Valley's modest town square like a thunderclap. Morning in this quiet community was usually punctuated by bird calls, a tractor off in the distance, or the soft bustle of townsfolk starting their day. Now, those comforting sounds were drowned out by the metallic rumble of exhaust pipes. The Steel Fists had set up a loose perimeter, their shiny chrome bikes arranged in a display that was as much about intimidation as it was about logistics. People stepped cautiously from their homes to peek at the commotion. Some took refuge behind the closed doors of shops, peering through blinds or cracked windows. Others, who had the misfortune of being outside, found themselves standing still, almost rooted to the ground, unsure whether it was safer to move or remain unnoticed. A sense of collective unease crackled in the air, the way it might before a storm. Naomi Graves emerged from the library, shepherding a small group of students who had been in the middle of a reading lesson. She led them across the square toward a safer area, her posture rigid with tension. The children moved in a tight cluster, their wide eyes darting from one menacing biker to another. Hector Delgado, who owned the town's only grocery store, watched from his doorway. He was a solid man, used to hard work and early mornings, but the presence of these bikers drained the color from his usually lively expression. He remembered all too well handing over protection fees last week, the shame still raw in his mind. At the center of the square, Blade stood with arms folded, surveying the uneasy faces. He seemed to thrive on their fear, a predator relishing the submission of prey. Marcus Townsend observed him from Rosie's diner, standing just inside the entrance. The glass door framed Marcus's silhouette, broad and solid despite his extra weight, and Blade's smug gaze flicked over him as if challenging him to make a move. In that charged moment, Marcus recalled missions in far-flung deserts and steamy jungles, times he'd faced down opponents who outgunned and outnumbered him. What had saved him then was more than just weaponry or cunning. It was the unity of a team bound by unbreakable trust. He couldn't help but draw parallels to the frightened townspeople here. They lacked the confidence that came from camaraderie, from knowing without doubt someone had their back. Rosie hovered nearby, breathing unevenly as she clutched a dish rag to her chest. The diner, usually filled with laughter and the mingling aromas of burgers and pies, now felt like a besieged fortress. Marcus gave her a reassuring nod. "Stay calm," he whispered. He glanced behind him at Naomi, who had just hustled her students through the door. Her eyes, framed by worry, met his. For a heartbeat, he wondered if this was how the villagers in foreign war zones had felt, hopeless, overshadowed by armed men who showed no mercy. Outside, Blade lifted his chin. "Marcus Townsend," he called out, voice echoing off the brick facades. "Why don't you step out here and show us what a big, tough Marine you really are?" The mocking invitation sent a ripple of dread through the onlookers. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew that stepping onto the street alone would be foolish. The Steel Fists were eager for a provocation to showcase their dominance. But he also sensed something Blade did not, that subtle hum of an approaching rescue. His phone call had been brief, but it had set in motion a chain of events far beyond the bikers' comprehension. Reinforcements were on their way, brothers and sisters who understood that sometimes all it took was one call for help to rally those you thought you'd never see again. Blade's sneer deepened as he caught sight of Marcus inching out of Rosie's diner. The leader of the Steel Fists raised his voice so all could hear. "You still playing soldier, old man?" he said, flipping the toothpick in his mouth to the other side. "You want to show these good folks how a Marine stands up to real men?" The rest of the bikers hooted, their amusement ringing over the otherwise silent square. Some revved their pieces, sending plumes of exhaust curling into the crisp autumn air. Marcus stopped a few paces away from the diner's door, arms at his side, posture strangely relaxed for a man confronted by a small army of thugs. The tension ratcheted up by the second, each breath feeling heavier than the last. Naomi watched from inside, heart pounding. A couple of children clutched at her coat sleeves, their eyes darting nervously between the towering figures of the bikers and Marcus's broad shoulders. "I know men who have run through bullet fire to save their comrades," Marcus said, his voice steady but not loud. He wasn't delivering a challenge, merely stating a truth. I've seen medics risk their lives under bombardment to keep their friends breathing. His gaze shifted to the cluster of bikers, their mocking grins faltering just slightly. That's real strength, he continued. It has nothing to do with making innocent people tremble. A flicker of uncertainty passed through the steel fists. Some parted their lips as though they meant to taunt again, but the words didn't come. Blade set his jaw, refusing to let doubt sully his bravado. You're messing with the wrong crew, he growled. We've got this place under our thumb, so why don't you crawl back under whatever rock you came from? With a dismissive wave of his hand, he tried to signal the conversation was over. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he locked eyes with Blade. Greystone Valley isn't yours to take, he said quietly. Not today. Those 3 words might not have sounded like much, but the conviction in them made Blade bristle with rage. With a sudden snap, Blade swung a punch at Marcus, an arc of motion fueled by anger. But despite his extra weight, Marcus sidestepped with a surprising agility, letting Blade's fist whoosh past his ear. Off balance, Blade stumbled, slamming into 2 of his own men. The bikers erupted in angry shouts, some stepping forward, fists clenched. The townspeople who had been watching gasped or shrank back, anticipating a brutal fight. But Marcus stood firm, reading the situation like a battlefield. In the tight ring of aggression, he saw an opening, one that might buy time until Lou Bradley's promised backup arrived. He raised a hand, and for a moment, his gaze swept over the bystanders. Naomi's eyes shone with both fear and something else. Hope. An engine's rumble approached from a side street, causing a brief lull in the pandemonium. Heads turned to see an old pickup truck roll into view, dust trailing behind it. At the wheel was a middle-aged man wearing a worn cap, no visible patches or insignia. But from the truck bed rose a figure with a watchful gaze, someone whose posture spoke of training and discipline. Marcus felt a knot in his chest loosen. The cavalry, in some form, had arrived. A small taste of what was about to follow. What happened next felt like an orchestration, each piece moving into place with a practiced ease reminiscent of a military maneuver. The pickup truck parked at the edge of the square, and the man in the bed, stocky with close-cropped hair, jumped down, scanning the scene before him. One by one, more vehicles began arriving, trickling into Greystone Valley as if guided by an invisible thread. Some were sedans, others motorcycles, and a few old Jeeps, but every driver or rider stepping out carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd served. At the center of it all, Colonel Lou Bradley emerged from a battered SUV. He was tall, his posture ramrod straight, and wore a simple olive-green jacket with no flashy emblems. Only the subtle Recon Brotherhood patch on his sleeve hinted at his background. His gaze swept the square, taking stock of the bikers' positions, the anxious civilians, and finally landing on Marcus, who stood near Rosie's diner's door. Marcus hadn't seen Lou in years, but the man's confident stride was instantly recognizable. The steel fist fell silent for a moment, uncertain what to make of this new development. Blade stalked forward, trying to reassert control. What is this, some family reunion? He snarled, gesturing angrily at the newcomers. You want to turn this place into a circus? Get lost. Lou regarded Blade calmly, not flinching in the slightest. We heard a friend needed help, he said simply. It wasn't a threat or a boast, just a statement of fact. Behind him, more veterans gathered, some stepping in front of the townspeople as though forming a protective perimeter. Naomi Graves, still clutching the hands of her students, found herself guided back into the diner by a gentle nudge from a tall woman wearing an old Marine jacket. The woman didn't speak, but her reassuring presence told Naomi everything she needed to know. They were safe. Hector Delgado stood by his grocery store, mouth slightly ajar in astonishment. He recognized in these newcomers a quiet unity, something the Steel Fists lacked. Even the way they formed into small clusters, covering each other's blind spots, suggested a practiced discipline that intimidation alone couldn't crack. The bikers might have numbers, but these were individuals who had faced far greater dangers than a street gang in a small town. With each passing minute, more vehicles rumbled into view, parking along side streets or at the far edges of the square. Rosie peered through the diner's windows in awe. It was as if the entire region's network of veterans had answered the call. Some bore tattoos indicating Army Ranger units. Others wore hats denoting the Air Force or Navy. A few older bikers among them displayed patches from past foreign conflicts. And though they came from different branches, their unity was palpable. Blade's temper flared. He turned to his men, gesturing sharply for them to spread out. "I don't care who they are," he hissed. "We're not backing down." Yet even as he snarled these words, a flicker of uncertainty flashed in his eyes. He could sense that these newly arrived individuals held no fear of him or his reputation. Marcus caught that flicker too, and though his heart still pounded, he felt a surge of confidence. Help had come. Help forged in shared experiences of life, death, and unwavering loyalty. The hours that followed were tense, as though two forces were drawing invisible lines through Greystone Valley. On one side, the Steel Fists occupied a rundown warehouse near the edge of town, converting it into a makeshift fortress. Their motorcycles lined the exterior walls, while Blade paced inside, muttering curses and rubbing the knuckles he'd bruised during his failed swing at Marcus. Surrounding him were his most faithful lieutenants, Titan, Crow, and a few others with equally menacing monikers. They eyed each other, each uncertain if their bravado could withstand the sudden appearance of so many disciplined veterans. Meanwhile, back at Rosie's diner, Colonel Lou Bradley and Marcus Townsend conferred in hushed tones. The diner, which had once been the scene of the Steel Fists' intimidation, now served as a focal point for the town's resistance. The worn linoleum floor was covered in scuff marks from boots, both from locals and newcomers. A folding table in the back corner had been repurposed as a strategy station, littered with road maps of Greystone Valley and walkie-talkies. Scraps of paper held hastily sketched notes about vantage points, choke points, and safe zones for civilians. "Sheriff Barnes has agreed to coordinate with us," Lou said, scanning the scribbled layout. "But we'll need clear communication channels." Standing beside him was Hector Delgado, pointing to his grocery store on the map. "If the Steel Fists try anything, they'll likely hit us again. I'd rather not stand around waiting to be robbed." Marcus nodded, glancing over to where Naomi Graves hovered by the diner's counter. She caught his eye, and in that fleeting moment, he realized how high the stakes were. For her, for the children, for all the honest folks who just wanted to live without fear. "We'll position a small team near your store," Marcus said, turning back to Hector. "Doc Mullins, our old medic, has a knack for quick responses. He's been coordinating well with some of the guys who just arrived." Rosie flitted about, distributing sandwiches and coffee to the veterans huddled around the tables. She offered supportive smiles, though her face still bore traces of worry. The buzz of conversation in the diner had an undercurrent of readiness. You could almost smell the adrenaline, a distinct mix of nerves and confidence. Lou's phone chimed, another text from a unit buddy confirming arrival in a neighboring county. He showed it to Marcus, and the two exchanged a knowing look. Reinforcements continued to trickle in, forging a gathering storm the Steel Fists had sorely underestimated. A hush spread as the veterans collectively recognized that a confrontation was unavoidable. Blade and his crew wouldn't simply pack up and ride away. Intimidation was their currency, and they would not relinquish it without a fight. Still, the approach here was measured. They weren't looking for a violent showdown. They planned to safeguard the town and restore peace. "We'll give them a chance to stand down," Lou said quietly, tapping a pen against the map. "If they refuse, we respond with the necessary force. And we do it our way. Controlled, precise, minimizing collateral damage." Marcus caught Naomi's gaze again, recalling the fear in her eyes, the trembling hands of Rosie, the frustration of Hector. He wondered if the final standoff would happen soon. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the diner's windows. It felt like the quiet before a thunderstorm, the townspeople clinging to a fragile sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, this influx of veterans could defy the odds and bring an end to the Steel Fists' reign of terror without the town being reduced to shambles. Nightfall brought a hush over Greystone Valley. Streetlights buzzed to life, casting cones of amber along deserted sidewalks. In many homes, lights flickered off as residents hunkered down, unsure if the darkness would cloak an impending attack. The tension was tangible, like the static-laden air before a lightning strike. Marcus and Lou coordinated quietly from the diner, dispatching small teams of veterans to various points around town, particularly the grocery store, the school building, and the memorial park that served as Greystone Valley's central landmark. Blade, however, had no intention of waiting idly. Enraged by the growing presence of armed and experienced veterans, he concocted a plan to strike swiftly and decisively. Splitting his steel fists into smaller squads, he aimed to create chaos across town, forcing the veterans to spread thin. It was a tactic Blade had used before in larger cities: move fast, sow panic, and disappear into the night. But this time his opponent wasn't a disorganized police force or unsuspecting shopkeepers. This time it was men and women who had spent their careers training to face disarray head-on. Marcus and Lou received word of the assault when Doc Mullins, stationed near Hector's grocery store, radioed in with a clipped report. "Multiple bikes incoming. Looks like they're circling to the back entrance." His voice remained remarkably calm. No adrenaline-fueled shouting, just the steady tone of someone who'd once treated injuries under gunfire. "We're ready," Doc added, and then the line cut out. Over at the school, Naomi had long since gone home with her students, but two veterans stayed behind. Their vigilance paid off. Moments after Doc's call, they caught sight of a separate group of bikers prowling around, likely aiming to break in or, at the very least, damage the building. The veterans followed standard procedure, cornering the gang members by using the school's narrow hallways and heavy doors. Though the bikers brandished chains and knives, they found themselves outmatched by coordinated takedowns, culminating in the bikers pinned down with zip ties around their wrists. Meanwhile, Blade himself led the largest contingent to the memorial park. He imagined a show of force near the town's symbolic heart would spark maximum fear. The rumble of so many motorcycles at once shattered the quiet. Headlights carved beams through the dark, glinting off the memorial statue of a solitary soldier. The park benches and tidy flower beds, normally peaceful spots, took on an eerie cast under the bike's glare. Lou, Bradley, and Marcus were waiting, having anticipated the park's significance. They spread out, letting their knowledge of tactical spacing guide them. Blade revved his engine, the roar echoing off the stone walls of nearby buildings. He waved a chain above his head, inciting his men to do the same. But instead of scattering, the veterans held their line. In practiced unison, they advanced, flashes of discipline over brute force. Some used hand signals to direct one another, reminiscent of how recon teams once navigated hostile terrain in total silence. Amid the chaos, Blade spotted Marcus's familiar silhouette and made a beeline for him. They met near the statue, its engraved plaque honoring fallen heroes from Greystone Valley. The significance wasn't lost on Marcus. This was hallowed ground, a reminder of sacrifice and valor. Blade swung his chain, but Marcus ducked, countering with a maneuver that took Blade by surprise. Within moments, the steel fists found themselves overwhelmed, their intimidation faltering in the face of real combat know-how. The clash at the memorial was fierce but mercifully short. As the bikers realized they were cornered, their attacks easily predicted and neutralized. By midnight, the din of revving engines receded into sporadic echoes. Radios crackled with updates. The grocery store was secure, the school was safe, and the memorial park stood unscathed except for scattered debris. Blade's grand offensive had crumbled, leaving many of his men subdued and tied up, waiting for the authorities to arrive. When the first rays of dawn peeked over the rooftops, Greystone Valley looked as though it had weathered a fierce storm, one that left surprisingly minimal damage given the violence it threatened. Broken glass sparkled on the sidewalk near Hector Delgado's store, but the building itself remained intact. A few scorched patches in the park's grass marked where motorcycle tires had spun out, but the memorial still stood tall and solemn under the pale morning light. Inside Rosie's diner, the atmosphere was more subdued than triumphant. While some veterans ate a quick breakfast, exhaustion was etched into their features. Others huddled around tables discussing next steps, speaking in hushed tones reminiscent of a debrief after a long mission. Marcus Townsend sat at the counter with a steaming mug of coffee in hand. Despite the relief coursing through him that the town was safe for now, a heaviness pulled at his spirit. He had never relished conflict, even when it was necessary. The memory of each punch thrown or submission hold applied lingered like a bruise on his conscience. Colonel Lou Bradley approached, removing his jacket to reveal a sweat-soaked t-shirt. "We have most of them secured at the old warehouse on Broad Street," he said, voice tinged with fatigue. "Sheriff Barnes is calling in for transportation." Looks like it'll be a full house at the county jail for a while. Marcus nodded, taking a sip of coffee. Part of him felt relief. Another part recognized that the real work might just be beginning. Hector strolled into the diner, carefully skirting around a couple of veterans, cleaning their gear at a corner table. "I've got some boarded-up windows, but nothing I can't fix," he informed Marcus, a cautious smile ghosting across his lips. "Better than last time they broke in," he added, a note of gratitude coloring his voice. Naomi Graves followed soon after, carrying a box of pastries she'd picked up from a bakery 2 towns over. She handed them out to the exhausted veterans with warm thanks, her students' safety still foremost in her mind. "You have no idea how much this means," she murmured, her eyes shining with emotion. Across the diner, Rosie was at the stove, cooking up extra batches of scrambled eggs and bacon. She refused payment from any of the veterans, telling them they'd more than earned a hearty meal. The sight of her bustling among them, her earlier fear replaced by a maternal kind of pride, was enough to bring a faint smile to Marcus's lips. Then the door opened, and in walked Blade, escorted by 2 grim-faced deputies. His hands were bound, and a glare of pure venom smoldered in his eyes. He scanned the room, taking in the cluster of veterans, the battered gear, the watchful stares. Marcus slid off his stool, moving to stand beside Lou Bradley. The diner fell silent as Blade's gaze landed on Marcus. "Hope you're satisfied," Blade spat, his voice rough from fatigue. Marcus held the gaze, remembering how Blade had mocked him in that very spot just a day ago. "I won't say I'm happy about all this," Marcus replied quietly, "but I'm not sorry it ended this way either." Blade's sneer wavered as the deputies nudged him forward, taking him outside to a waiting patrol car. In the stillness that followed, the weight of what had happened settled on everyone present. Tensions had erupted, and now the fallout would begin. Not long after Blade was hauled off, Colonel Bradley and Sheriff Barnes held a quick meeting with the town council in a small conference room behind the municipal office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating tired faces that were still grappling with the sudden end to the Steel Fist's terror. A sense of cautious relief filled the air, but it was laced with uncertainty. The gang might be dismantled, but what about those members who hadn't been caught, or the aftermath of the violence that had plagued Greystone Valley? Lou Bradley spoke first, his voice carrying an assured authority. "We've managed to arrest the key players, but some of the younger recruits scattered during the night. There's also the matter of those who simply followed Blade out of fear or desperation. They might be walking the streets right now, unsure what to do or where to go." A murmur rippled through the council members. They exchanged looks that bordered on helplessness. Sheriff Barnes took over. "We can increase patrols, but we're short on manpower until the state police send reinforcements." He tapped a pen against the conference table. "We need a plan that won't just keep them off the streets for a day or two, but for good." An unexpected voice piped up from the back. "Locking them all up might not be the only solution." The speaker was Lily Saunders, the youngest member of the council, known for her progressive ideas. Her tone was tentative but unwavering. "Some of these gang members are locals who fell in with the wrong crowd. Maybe we offer them a structured path forward, something that helps them rebuild their lives without crime." A hush fell. A few council members bristled, still raw from the extortion and violence the Steel Fists had inflicted. "You're suggesting we go easy on them?" asked one councilman, eyes narrowing. Lily shook her head. "I'm suggesting we break the cycle. Prison might keep them away temporarily, but it won't give them any skill or reason to stay away from gangs once they're out." Lou looked thoughtful, glancing at Marcus, who stood near the door. Marcus had felt something akin to this sentiment brewing in his own heart, especially after seeing the fear and despair in some younger bikers' faces. They weren't all hardened criminals. Some were kids who never knew another life. "Maybe we could set up a rehabilitation program," Marcus offered quietly. "Discipline, life skills, job training, things that can be taught by those of us who served." He saw Lily's eyes light up, clearly relieved to have someone support her idea. The older council members cast wary glances, but the events of the past weeks had already stretched their conceptions of what was possible. If an overweight veteran's single phone call could rally dozens of disciplined Marines, maybe this unlikely plan could work too. "I'll back it," Sheriff Barnes agreed, nodding slowly. If you folks are willing to organize it, I'll see that the participants remain under supervision. But it's gotta be strict. One slip and they were out. The meeting ended with a guarded consensus. They would attempt a pilot program, offering ex-gang members a chance to earn back trust through honest work and structured guidance. Lily jotted down the initial proposal, her pen scratching across paper in an act of quiet determination. As Marcus left the municipal building, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and renewed responsibility. The immediate threat was gone, but the deeper question remained: how to break the cycle of fear and aggression that had nearly destroyed Greystone Valley. Over the next several days, Greystone Valley underwent a collective exhale. Shops opened with fewer worried glances over the shoulder, and families ventured out for evening strolls without the constant dread of encountering roaring motorcycles or menacing demands for protection money. While remnants of the steel fists lurked in the shadows, their tight grip on the town had been broken. Marcus Townsend awoke each morning feeling a new sense of possibility. He'd grown used to the ache in his joints and the extra weight he carried, but now there was a lightness in his chest that came from a rekindled purpose. He and Colonel Lou Bradley, along with other veterans who had come to their aid, began drafting a structure for the proposed rehabilitation program. They set up a base of operations in an old community center at the edge of town, a place seldom used, with a large gymnasium and a few smaller rooms that could be converted into classrooms and dormitories. Sheriff Barnes pitched in by distributing notices to any low-level gang members who had slipped through the initial arrests. The notices offered an alternative: turn themselves in and enroll in the new program. There'd be strict rules, daily check-ins, and a zero-tolerance policy for backsliding into criminal behavior, but also a chance to learn tangible skills and rebuild a life free from gangs. Lily Saunders and a few other council members volunteered to help coordinate. Some townspeople grumbled about the idea, still feeling that the bikers deserved nothing but jail time. Hector Delgado, though still nursing a grudge against the ones who vandalized his store, tentatively supported the initiative. If it means fewer punks trying to shake me down in the future, I'll donate supplies, he said with a grunt, dropping off a box of canned goods and cleaning materials at the community center. Naomi Graves planned evening literacy classes for any participants, believing strongly in the power of education to spark change. Before long, a few ex-Steel Fists, those who'd managed to avoid arrest, trickled in. They were wary, eyes darting, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. One young man, who went by Rook, stepped through the center's doors in tattered jeans and a leather vest that was more worn out than menacing. I got this notice, he mumbled, showing a crumpled paper to Marcus. I'm not looking to go to jail, so I guess I'll try this. Marcus exchanged a glance with Lou, who nodded. We're not promising an easy road, Marcus told Rook. It'll be early mornings, physical training, classes, and a curfew. No drugs, no weapons, no contact with your old gang buddies. You ready for that? Rook hesitated, then shrugged. Beats running. He didn't sound entirely convinced, but at least he was there. It was a start. The veterans set him up with a bunk in one of the old meeting rooms, now retrofitted with cots. They assigned him daily tasks: kitchen duty, cleaning schedules, attendance at mandatory group sessions. Watching him walk down the hallway, shoulders slumped but no longer bristling with defiance, Marcus couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Out in the parking lot, as the sun dipped low, Colonel Bradley placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. We did what we had to do, but the real challenge is right here, he said, gesturing to the community center. Marcus nodded, looking at the worn paint on the building's walls. Indeed, tearing down the Steel Fists was only the first step. Rebuilding lives, the ex-bikers and the townspeople's, would be a much tougher mission. Steady progress took root in the makeshift rehabilitation program, even though skepticism still ran high within the town. Each morning started at sunrise with a group exercise routine led by some of the younger veterans who were adept at physical training. It wasn't a military boot camp, but it borrowed elements of discipline and structure. The ex-Steel Fists, like Rook, woke up bleary-eyed, their bodies rebelling against the unfamiliar schedule. Still, day after day, they stumbled out of bed at the crack of dawn, lacing up worn sneakers in place of heavy boots. After a quick breakfast, they'd attend workshops in the center's repurposed clamorrooms. Naomi Graves devoted her evenings to planning lessons on basic reading comprehension, functional math, and even a bit of history tailored to their interests. Topics like motorcycle mechanics or the evolution of civil rights, hoping to show them worlds beyond the gang's narrow scope. Some sat through class with sullen expressions, others with a glimmer of curiosity. By midday, the group would split up for different tasks around Greystone Valley, painting over graffiti, cleaning up littered lots, or helping Wallace Reed, owner of the local hardware store, repair damaged storefronts. Not everyone took to the program wholeheartedly. A few ex-gang members balked at the constant supervision or the mandatory check-ins, claiming it felt too much like jail. Others pined for the adrenaline rush of their old life, the sense of warped brotherhood they'd had with the Steel Fists. More than one participant dropped out, ignoring repeated calls from Sheriff Barnes to reconsider. But for those who stayed, a fragile sense of possibility began to blossom. Rook, in particular, kept his head down and did the work. Marcus noticed him scouring floors and hauling debris without complaint, though it seemed he lacked the confidence to make friends. In the evenings, Marcus sometimes found Rook alone in the courtyard behind the center, staring at the night sky. One time, Marcus approached him. "How's it going?" he asked gently, mindful not to scare him off with paternal lectures. Rook shrugged. "I'm not used to this," he admitted, casting a glance at the lit windows of the community center. "People trusting me to do stuff, or giving me a chance when I mess up." Marcus recognized the undercurrent of shame. He'd seen that look in fellow Marines haunted by regrets of things done or left undone. "This might feel like punishment," Marcus said, "but if you can stick with it, you'll come out stronger in a way that matters." Rook offered a non-committal grunt, then nodded once before turning to go back inside. The biggest hurdle wasn't the chores or the classes. It was the slow process of rebuilding trust in Greystone Valley. Shopkeepers still watched warily whenever a former Steel Fist entered their store. Parents were cautious about letting their kids roam too close to men who had once wielded chains and knives. Colonel Bradley and Sheriff Barnes tried to facilitate community meetings where ex-bikers could apologize and share why they were trying to change. Those sessions were awkward and tense, but sometimes a single honest testimony could crack the armor of skepticism in a listener's heart. Meanwhile, the veterans who had rallied to Marcus's call began trickling back to their own lives. A few stayed on, acting as mentors, teaching practical skills like carpentry or auto repair. In the eyes of the townspeople, a new chapter had begun, one that would test everyone's capacity for forgiveness. As the initial weeks of the rehabilitation program rolled by, Greystone Valley found itself in the national spotlight. Word spread through social media and regional news outlets about a small town where a veteran's desperate call had mobilized dozens of former service members to stand against a notorious gang, and then offered that gang's remnants a shot at redemption. Journalists arrived in dusty SUVs, expecting sensational stories of conflict. Instead, they found the slower, more human story of men and women learning how to repair houses, fix fences, and more importantly, rebuild their own lives. Every day at dawn, Colonel Lou Bradley was there to oversee the morning muster. He'd offer gruff encouragement to anyone struggling, whether it was an ex-biker trying to complete a set of push-ups or a volunteer from the community grappling with leftover anxiety. Marcus, for his part, continued to walk the line between hands-on involvement and quiet support. Having conjured this tidal wave of change with a single phone call, he sometimes felt overwhelmed by the momentum it had gathered. Naomi Graves became something of an informal historian for the project, collecting stories and anecdotes. She planned to compile them into a small publication that other towns could reference. She was convinced that the key to genuine transformation lay in empathy and understanding. She recorded testimonies from ex-Steel Fists who admitted they'd joined for a sense of family or respect, never expecting to be roped into extortion and violence. Many interviews revealed broken homes or past traumas that the gang lifestyle had seemed to soothe, at least superficially. Local skepticism persisted, of course. More than one homeowner recoiled when a former gang member offered to repaint their fence. Some merely tolerated the help, crossing their arms as they watched them work, reluctant to acknowledge the possibility of change. Each time someone slammed a door or muttered a bitter remark, the ex-bikers felt the sting of their past transgressions. Progress was uneven, marked by small victories, like a shopkeeper trusting a former extortionist with the keys for a remodeling task, and occasional setbacks, like a fistfight that broke out among two participants still harboring old rivalries. Rook, however, became a quiet example of what could happen when someone surrendered to the possibility of a different life. He showed up for every class, gradually improving his reading level under Naomi's patient guidance. Wallace Reed offered Rook an apprenticeship at the hardware store, teaching him basics like inventory management and tool maintenance. Day by day, Rook's posture grew more confident. He even cracked a rare smile when Wallace cracked a joke, something that months ago would have been unthinkable. Still, the specter of Blade lingered. Though he was in custody, rumors circulated that he kept in touch with a few loyal followers on the outside. Occasionally, a new message would slip onto social media, deriding anyone who cooperated with the program as traitors or sellouts. Each time that happened, Marcus and Lou braced for a spike in tension. But so far, the majority held fast, buoyed by the sense of purpose the program provided. Walking through the community center late one evening, Marcus paused to observe a group therapy session from a distance. A handful of ex-bikers and a couple of veterans sat in a circle of folding chairs, sharing their doubts and insecurities. In the dim lighting, he saw hardened faces soften, shoulders relax. There were no easy answers or magical cures, just the slow burn of communal effort. And that, he thought, might be the most powerful weapon they had against the shadows of fear. Each new day brought fresh challenges, not only in the program, but in the lingering distrust that hovered over Greystone Valley. Some townspeople openly questioned whether these ex-gang members truly deserved a second chance. Marcus tried to maintain a delicate balance. He reminded his fellow veterans, and sometimes even himself, that redemption was rarely a straight line. Everyone carried the weight of their past, and for those who had once terrorized the town, that weight was immense. One chilly afternoon, Marcus wandered into the hardware store, where Wallace Reed had volunteered to host practical workshops. A cluster of ex-bikers and veterans pored over demonstration tables, learning everything from basic plumbing repairs to proper tool usage. Wallace was an old-school craftsman, quick to correct mistakes but also quick to praise effort. The smell of sawdust and metal shavings permeated the air, creating a far more peaceful environment than any biker clubhouse could have offered. Rook was there, wiping sweat from his forehead as he finished demonstrating how to fix a leaky faucet. A small audience of participants clapped politely. Marcus gave him a nod of approval, recalling how timid Rook had been just a month ago. Rook's cheeks warmed with pride, his once sullen gaze now lit by a cautious optimism. After the demonstration, Wallace pulled Marcus aside. "He's got potential," he said, voice gruff, but sincere. "Only question is whether he can stay the course." Marcus understood that Wallace spoke not only of Rook, but of every ex-gang member in the program. "We're doing everything we can," Marcus assured him, "but they have to want it too." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the store's entrance. A local named Joe Grayson stormed in, face twisted with anger. "Wallace, you really trust these thugs around your store?" he demanded, glaring at Rook and the others. "What if they decide to rob you blind the moment you turn your back?" Rook visibly flinched, tension coiling in his frame. Wallace took a measured breath. "Joe, you remember who nearly destroyed my storefront, right?" he asked calmly. "These men are here to fix it, not tear it down." But Joe was unconvinced. "I'll believe it when I see it," he spat, turning on his heel and marching back out. A heavy silence fell. Rook stared at the floor, shoulders drooping. It was a stark reminder that no matter how many fences they mended or faucets they fixed, acceptance would be slow to come. Marcus placed a hand on Rook's shoulder. "Don't let it stop you," he said softly. "Trust can't be forced. It's earned, day by day." With a shrug, Rook resumed tidying the workstation. The moment could have escalated into a shouting match, or, in the old days, a violent confrontation. Instead, there was just a somber acceptance that not everyone would be won over easily. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows as though echoing the unsettled mood. The sky was darkening earlier each day, a sign that winter was on its way. And with winter came harsher tests of resilience for both the program participants and the townspeople of Greystone Valley. Marcus lingered for a moment longer, watching Rook methodically organize the tools. It reminded him of the Marine motto, "Adapt and overcome." The boy was adapting, the town was adapting, and maybe if they could all endure the bumps and bruises, they'd overcome. By the time autumn's vibrant leaves had mostly blown away, Greystone Valley's experiment in rehabilitation had gained a sort of gravitational pull. Nearby communities started sending representatives, chiefs of police, social workers, even a few hopeful mayors, eager to see whether they could replicate the success story forming in this once-forgotten town. Colonel Lou Bradley found himself unexpectedly leading orientation sessions for these visitors, walking them through the community center's labyrinth of classrooms, dorm rooms, and improvised meeting spaces. In the main hall, makeshift bulletin boards displayed schedules for everything from physical training to carpentry workshops, conflict resolution classes, and group counseling sessions. Rook's photograph was pinned up next to a short blurb about his rapid improvement in literacy and job skills, a point of pride for the mentors guiding him. Marcus noticed the visitors reading these blurbs with skeptical curiosity, as if searching for hidden strings or disclaimers that would explain why this place was working as well as it was. One drizzly afternoon, after giving yet another tour to a delegation from 2 counties over, Lou collapsed into a folding chair in the center's lobby. Marcus approached, offering him a bottle of water. "You'd think we started a revolution," Lou joked, massaging the back of his neck. "All we did was answer a phone call." Marcus smiled, though it was tinged with humility. "Sometimes one call is all it takes," he replied. "Not everyone has the network or the courage to make it, though." They were interrupted by Naomi Graves, who rushed in holding a stack of folders nearly toppling out of her arms. "I need your signatures," she said breathlessly, "for the new grant proposal. If we get this funding, we can hire full-time instructors for vocational training." Marcus and Lou exchanged a glance of mutual agreement before adding their signatures. With the program growing, more specialized help was exactly what they needed. Despite the excitement, challenges persisted. Regularly, rumors trickled in that a handful of former Steel Fists were still loyal to Blade, using burner phones to coordinate petty crimes in outlying regions. Occasionally, a participant in the program would vanish overnight, leaving behind a bunk or a half-finished workshop assignment. Each defection felt like a small heartbreak for those who remained, a reminder that the path to genuine change was uneven. Public sentiment also varied. Some Greystone Valley residents welcomed the out-of-town visitors, proud to see their local effort become a blueprint for others. Others complained that the steady stream of strangers disrupted their routines. At the diner, Rosie sometimes had to rearrange tables to accommodate the new influx of volunteers and observers. She did so cheerfully, but Marcus caught the tired lines beneath her eyes. The last few months had been a whirlwind for everyone. In quieter moments that Marcus slipped away from the bustle to check on individuals like Rook, he'd find him bent over a stack of paperwork, carefully practicing letters, or helping Wallace Reed tally inventory at the hardware store. The transformation was noticeable. Rook's posture straighter, his eyes more alive. Yet there was always that sliver of doubt, a wariness born of knowing how easily the past could rear up again. When evening came, Marcus often found himself walking the old, lamp-lit streets of Greystone Valley, reflecting on how different everything was. Gone were the motorcycle gangs lurking around corners. Instead, he'd occasionally spot a pair of veterans strolling by, quietly on patrol, or an ex-biker smoking a cigarette outside the community center, pondering tomorrow's responsibilities. The hum of progress was palpable, even if it rested on fragile ground. Winter winds arrived sooner than anticipated, heralded by biting gusts that rattled loose shutters on Greystone Valley's older buildings. With them came a new set of challenges for the rehabilitation program. Most of the labor-intensive tasks, painting, construction, road cleanup, were harder to accomplish in icy conditions. Still, the veterans adapted. They set up indoor stations where participants could learn to repair small appliances, practice basic computer skills, and handle administrative tasks. Wallace Reed lent a section of his hardware store for tool maintenance sessions, while Naomi Graves moved her literacy and tutoring classes to an earlier time slot so people wouldn't have to walk home too late in the freezing dark. The influx of visitors hadn't slowed. Colonel Lou Bradley spent long hours coordinating with local officials and philanthropic organizations, trying to secure enough funding for a permanent heating system in the community center. We're running space heaters right now, but that's a short-term fix, he explained to a visiting city council member from another county. If we want this program to last, we need infrastructure. Amid the logistical scramble, personal stories continued to unfold. One young man, nicknamed Switch, had been part of Blade's core group. Initially defiant, he surprised everyone by showing a knack for electronics. Within weeks, he was helping to refurbish donated computers that would later be installed in a small lab corner of the center. In quiet moments, he confided to Marcus that electronics had always fascinated him, but his gang life never gave him the chance to cultivate any real interest. This place is the first time I've felt useful, he admitted, awkwardly rubbing at a tattoo on his wrist. Of course, not all was smooth sailing. Tension still flared, especially when old loyalties tugged at participants. Rook, who had been doing well, caught wind of a rumor that Blade was rallying supporters from outside town. The rumor unsettled him, dredging up memories of intimidation and camaraderie twisted into something toxic. Marcus noticed Rook's shoulders tense again, his eyes darting with old anxieties. If you hear any specifics, let us know, Marcus gently advised. Until then, keep your focus on what you can control, your present steps, not your past associations. Meanwhile, townspeople oscillated between grudging acceptance and lingering suspicion. More than once, a store clerk or homeowner refused service to an ex-biker, citing uncertainty over whether they'd revert to old ways. Some nights, graffiti would appear, defacing a corner of the community center with messages like, "Once a thug, always a thug." But each time it happened, volunteers, both veterans and ex-gang members, would show up the next morning to scrub it clean. The act of erasing those hateful words became symbolic of the larger work they were doing. Rosie's Diner provided a semblance of warmth and normalcy, hosting Friday night socials that doubled as morale boosters. Marcus often saw ex-bikers hesitantly accepting a cup of coffee or slice of pie from Rosie, who treated them with equal parts caution and motherly kindness. Naomi sometimes brought her students in for a community dinner, encouraging them to see that bad guys could change. These evenings felt like tiny triumphs, living proof that adversity could be met with empathy. Despite the cold weather and the frayed edges of trust, a deeper sense of unity was forming, thread by thread. Some ex-bikers began referring to each other by real names rather than street monikers. A handful even started forging friendly ties with local residents, swapping recipes or discussing next summer's farmers market. And through it all, Marcus watched carefully, aware that real transformation was a precarious thing. One misstep could send it all crashing down, but steady resolve might make it endure. The steady rhythm of the program continued through the icy weeks, with participants waking early to face a day of structured tasks and skill building. By now, the community center was a flurry of activity, housing not only ex-bikers but also a small contingent of social workers and volunteers who believed in second chances. The building's previously barren walls were decorated with colorful motivational posters, some homemade, others donated, and a large banner that read, "Strength and Unity," stretched across the main hallway. One afternoon, as a light snowfall dusted the streets outside, Marcus Townsend found himself in a hushed conversation with Wallace Reed at the hardware store. They stood near a display of power tools, the smell of fresh-cut wood shavings lingering in the air. Wallace explained how he'd been approached by two local businesses who wanted to consider hiring participants who had demonstrated reliability and skill. "They heard about Rook's progress here," Wallace said with a rare smile. "If he can handle a ladder and a level, maybe he can handle a real job in construction." Marcus's chest swelled with cautious optimism. "That's exactly the kind of breakthrough we need," he remarked. "A chance for these folks to see an actual future, not just chores to pass the time." He glanced around the store, which had once been ravaged by the steel fists. The place now buzzed with a sense of purpose, part classroom, part workshop. Rook himself was in the back room, sorting out a newly arrived shipment of plumbing supplies, double-checking an inventory list with remarkable attention to detail. As if on cue, Rook emerged from the back, a slight smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "We're missing a couple of faucet heads," he reported to Wallace. "They must have been back-ordered." Wallace nodded, then clapped Rook on the shoulder. "Good catch, kid," he praised, turning to Marcus. "See, I told you he's got an eye for detail." Before Marcus could respond, the bell above the shop's front door jangled, admitting a blast of frigid air and a stooped figure wrapped in a heavy coat. It was Mr. Grayson, the same local who had previously stormed in, accusing the ex-bikers of being thieves. He stopped short upon spotting Rook. A flash of recognition passed over his features, making him tense. Rook swallowed, instinctively bracing for an insult or a confrontation. But instead of lashing out, Mr. Grayson cleared his throat. I needed some advice on fixing my fence," he said, addressing Wallace, but flicking his gaze nervously at Rook. "A plank fell off in the wind last night." Wallace gave an encouraging nod. "Rook here can help you pick out the right materials." A moment of silence stretched taut between them. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was a delicate moment. Would old grudges win out, or could something new take root? Grayson exhaled sharply, then gave a reluctant nod. "All right," he said, turning to Rook. "What do I need?" Rook approached him, quietly detailing the difference between nails, screws, and the best type of wood to withstand cold snaps. Their interaction was tinged with awkwardness, but it was happening, a conversation free of threats or curses. Marcus caught Wallace's eye, and they shared a small, triumphant smile. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Greystone Valley in a coat of white. Perhaps it was symbolic of a fresh start, a chance to bury old resentments under a layer of honest effort. As winter settled in fully, Greystone Valley took on the serene appearance of a postcard, snow-covered roofs in a central square lit by twinkling holiday lights. But behind the idyllic scenes, a profound change was taking shape. The veterans and ex-bikers continued their daily routines in the community center, forging new habits and deeper bonds with each passing week. Naomi Graves organized a winter festival at the Memorial Park, inviting local artisans, small businesses, and anyone curious about the rehabilitation program. On the festival day, rows of booths lined the park's walkways. Hot cocoa, handmade crafts, and festive wreaths drew families from all over the county. Rook helped Wallace Reed demonstrate handy DIY projects, like crafting wooden ornaments or building simple shelves to curious onlookers. Farther down, another group of ex-bikers supervised games for children, carefully managing a ring toss and face painting station. Parents who might have once recoiled at the sight of leather vests now approached with cautious smiles, letting their kids partake in the fun. Marcus ambled through the stalls, absorbing the hum of conversations, the swirl of laughter, and the aroma of spiced cider. He passed by Naomi, who was proudly showing off a small photography exhibit of the community center's progress. The pictures captured moments of ex-bikers in workshop aprons, teaching each other or cooperating with veterans on construction projects. One shot showed Rook giving a thumbs up while perched on a ladder, a wide grin splitting his face. Another depicted Colonel Lou Bradley addressing a group in the gym, his posture reflecting his years of service and natural leadership. A cluster of reporters stood near the center of the park, taking notes and snapping photos. Marcus approached them just in time to hear one journalist remark that he had never seen a town turn around so fast. Another reporter asked if there was a secret formula. Colonel Bradley, fielding their questions, merely smiled. "No secret," he said, "just discipline, accountability, and genuine opportunity. It also helps when a community is willing to give people a fair chance to prove they've changed." Near the park's entrance, Sheriff Barnes manned a small booth explaining the program's legal parameters. "We hold participants to strict standards," he told a woman who was curious about the arrangement. "They break the rules, they answer to the law, but so far, most of them are stepping up." Marcus lingered by the memorial statue where a group of children played in the snow, oblivious to the heavy inscriptions marking past sacrifices. He thought about how, not too long ago, Blade and the Steel Fists had tried to claim this same spot as a show of brute force. Now laughter replaced the roar of engines, and the faint melody of holiday music filled the air. A sudden cheer drew his attention. Over near the hot cocoa stand, Rook was handing a small cup to Mr. Grayson. Though the older man's posture was still a bit stiff, he accepted it with a nod. It was a brief, simple moment, yet it symbolized so much. Trust, in even the smallest form, had begun to take root. Marcus's gaze drifted to the horizon where lights twinkled along the tops of buildings. The transformation of Greystone Valley was hardly complete, but this gathering felt like a milestone, a testament to what could happen when people believed in each other's capacity for growth. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The old soldier in him recognized that battles weren't only fought with bullets and fists. Sometimes they were fought in the quiet forging of new beginnings. In the final days of winter, Greystone Valley radiated a calm sense of resolve, as if the months of effort had laid a foundation no snowfall could bury. Rosie's Diner remained a bustling hub. Veterans and reformed bikers alike would swing by for coffee and a hot meal, often mingling with townspeople who had once been too frightened to meet their gaze. Now they shared stories, joked about the weather, and quietly celebrated the small wins. On a frosty afternoon, Marcus Townsend found himself at the community center, helping Colonel Lou Bradley finalize a series of workshops for the coming spring. Plans were underway to teach basic financial literacy, welding, and even a course on conflict de-escalation techniques. "It feels like we're running a small college here," Lou quipped, organizing the sign-up sheets into neat stacks. Marcus chuckled at the thought. He never imagined that a single phone call would lead to this sprawling enterprise of second chances. The memory of that moment in Rosie's Diner, the steel fists laughing at him, drifted through his mind. Back then, he felt like he stood alone, an overweight veteran with faded skills and uncertain resolve. He reflected on how drastically life had changed, not just for him, but for the entire town. Even Rook, who now volunteered for night patrols to keep vandalism at bay, was a testament to transformation. No one pretended the old wounds were fully healed, but each day the scars became a bit less painful. During a brief break, Marcus noticed Rook standing by a bulletin board in the corridor. It was filled with job postings from local businesses that were beginning to trust the program's graduates. Rook ran a finger down a particular flyer advertising a construction job in a neighboring county. When he saw Marcus approaching, he looked both excited and anxious. "You think I'm ready?" Rook asked softly, tapping the paper. "I've learned a lot, but what if I screw up?" Marcus considered the question, a swirl of memories tugging at him, battles fought, friends lost, and the uncertain leaps of faith that had defined his own life. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he answered, meeting Rook's eyes with steady empathy. "But you've stuck with this program through some tough times. You've got the skills, and you've got the heart. That's all any of us can ask for." Rook nodded, swallowing hard. In that instant, Marcus saw the flicker of determination that so many recruits had shown in the Corps, those uncertain but courageous souls who stepped forward despite their fears. "I'm gonna apply," Rook said, voice trembling slightly. "Maybe this is my shot at a future." Marcus patted him on the back. "Go for it," he said, his own voice thick with unspoken pride. "I believe in you." As Rook walked away, Marcus felt the weight of everything they'd built here. Friendships formed, trust earned, and a community knit back together after near devastation. He glanced at the snow-laden windows, recalling how once the rev of motorcycles and the stench of fear had filled these streets. Now the only hum was the steady pace of rebuilding, a living testament to hope. Stepping outside, the cold air brushed his cheeks. He spotted Naomi Graves chatting with Wallace Reed by a salt truck, both of them smiling at some private joke. Across the street, Hector Delgado helped a couple of ex-bikers load a shipment of donated supplies. A hush of gratitude settled over Marcus as he realized that the real victory wasn't in beating the steel fists, but in creating a space where people could become better than their worst mistakes. He pulled his coat tighter, heading toward Rosie's Diner. The sun would be setting soon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, a fitting backdrop for a town that had finally learned how to rise again. Looking back on it all, I realized that this story isn't just about a gang being beaten or a veteran reuniting with old comrades. It's about how hope can flourish in the most unexpected places. From terrified shopkeepers to once feared bikers, people discovered they could be more than their worst mistakes. Walls of mistrust slowly crumbled, replaced by fences built together, literal and metaphorical. Seeing Rook stepping into a real job or locals finally strolling the streets without fear highlights the quiet power of unity and second chances. Personally, I'm inspired by how courage and compassion can reshape a whole community. Have thoughts on the transformations, challenges, or any favorite moments? Drop your comments below. Let's keep this conversation alive and explore how stories like these can guide us toward a more understanding and hopeful world.